In this video, we're going to explore painting a new type of flesh tone. This is ruddy flesh tone, or in other words, very tanned flesh tone. So this is going to be a little more orangey than most of the other flesh tones that we've tried. This is a Reaper figure. It's a nice shaman. I'm going to talk about some of the colors here. On the dark end of the scale, the olive drab, leather brown from Vallejo. I'm going to use a touch of brown rose here and there, but focus more on these colors, more towards the yellow and orange. Parasite brown, again from Vallejo. This is one of the Reaper high density pigments, made in flesh. Back to Vallejo over here, some ice yellow. Even some of these are going to contribute to a flesh tone that's not quite as pink. Green sky and verdigris. And these purples over here, the Gene Stealer purple and the Imperial purple, that's really for the outfit that he's wearing. I did choose that color intentionally because this complements the flesh tone, the orange of the flesh tone. And instead of maybe if I had made this, say, white or something more blue, then you make your tan flesh tone that much more orange. So that this was a good complementary color. So that covers the miniatures and the paints. The next thing I want to cover is our palette and the brushes. I have the brushes arranged on the palette in 3 primary groups. First one we're going to discuss are the filbert brushes. These come in a size range between usually 2 and 8. I like to use 4s and 6s. There's a couple of 4s. This is a 6. They are kind of an all-purpose brush because you have this large flat surface but tapered edged. And what that's going to let you do is use this to do some blending. You'll see me use these when I do the color swatches. One last aspect of the brush is the chisel edge. So you have the large flat surface, tapered, and chisel. So you do a whole lot for one brush, and it lets you, again, lets you do some wet blending and a lot of other fun effects. The least expensive version of this is usually the American Painter. Get these online, most craft stores. Really not a bad price for what you get. And in terms of economy, can't get much better than these number 8 rounds, which are actually craft brushes. Got the original case right here. These come in a set of 10. See that the points on these are really not too bad when they're new. Last for quite a long time, especially when you consider, for that price, 50 cents a brush. Again, lots of craft stores have these. And you can see here a newer brush with a nice tip. But when they start to get a little more abused, beat up, battered, well, you don't have to throw them away because they're perfect for painting bases. So you have something that's really rough surface. Why destroy all your good brushes when you can just take a brush that's already seen better days and jam the paint in there? Last group we'll discuss are these liner brushes. Again, you see American Painter, probably the most economical of all the liner brushes. Like the liner brushes because they hold a lot of liquid, a lot of pigment, and you can see you can go a long way with these. The spotters, I have some, I use those, but you tend to have to be very choppy with your paint strokes because you're always running out of paint. The whole purpose of the liner brush is that you've got all of this has paint in it instead of a spotter. It only has about that much to work with. This is kind of a mid-range liner brush here. It is actually from Winsor Newton. This is about halfway in between, say, the American Painter, and this is kind of your real deal here, the Winsor Newton Series 7 Kolinsky Sable. See by the handle, it's gotten a lot of use. I use this a whole lot, but it's not getting destroyed because a lot of the dirty work is being done by these other brushes. Other brushes that cost much less than your Series 7 Sable and serve a lot of other functions. So the brushes are discussed. One more thing we want to talk about is this palette. This is a fantastic surface. It's very non-absorbent, so perfect for keeping your colors alive a little longer. Here's an example of a full pad. So this is 9 by 12, 40 sheets. We got these off of Amazon. Find a lot of these in art stores. And the best part about these palettes, when it comes time for your cleanup, you're done for the day, you're done for the project, you just take off a sheet, rip it off, throw it in the garbage, and that's it. There's no trays to wash, nothing to clean, just throw it away. So we've got brushes, miniatures, paints, palettes. Now I'm going to do some of those color swatches to give you an idea of how we're going to let these colors interact with each other. So I've put some of the colors out on the palette, mostly in the range here of the flesh tones. Got the olive drab, the leather brown, some of the brown rose, the parasite brown, a little bit of the maiden flesh, and the ice yellow. What I've got here is a little sketch that we'll work on. I'm going to show you how these flesh tones kind of work together. And as I mentioned before, this flesh tone is going to be a little more towards the orange, because in previous flesh tones it's going more towards the pink. So this is kind of the most important color. It starts to provide of the orangey nature. I can see what we've gone to from this kind of much cooler color all the way to this warm. And I'm just going to start to put some of the color out on our little sketch here, focusing mostly on the leather brown and working mostly in the shadow areas. Occasionally going into my lighter colors. So I'm just trying to do is quickly establish some colors out here on the palette. So this is this is pretty much your darkest colors that you're going to have out. And now we'll see kind of how the brown rose and the parasite brown start to work together here to create a lighter flesh tone. At this point, I'm going to start to integrate a little bit of the maiden flesh and some of the yellow. And I know I'm talking about this color temperature. Is it warm? Is it cool? Is it more yellow? More red? That's a very important thing to think about, because some flesh tones are obviously going to be more towards the pink if it's someone who just doesn't see a whole lot of sunlight in their life. But also, you know, if someone who maybe has a lighter skin, spends an awful lot of time in the sun, Now it's going to change that a little bit. Also trying to show you just how flexible these filbert brushes can be, and the different range of brush strokes that you can get. See, I can get some fairly decent edges with these brushes. You can see I'm still making sure. I might even have to put some more of the Parasite Brown out on the palette because I want to make sure that this doesn't get too pink. So again, trying to focus more on a flesh tone that's got some yellow in it. So again, just kind of building up, starting to build up towards a lighter and lighter tone. And this is essentially the approach that we're gonna take when it comes to the miniature itself. I just figured it'd be much easier to see this on a larger scale. Now we won't necessarily be using a finger to blend large areas the way we are here. I'm going to probably do more of that via glazing and other techniques. So I can just continue to lighten this. And I want to wait, I'm going to let that dry a little bit before I move on to some lighter layers. So I'm going to go in and get some color here on the eye. Now, unlike some of the other, darker flesh tones where the eye is automatically, the iris is more of a dark brown, much more of a dark brown. Here you could still have someone that actually has eyes that are more blue, and we'll experiment with that. It's kind of another important area here. This area underneath the eyebrow, important to have that not be too dark, especially since here this is more about tan flesh tone instead of, say, something with more of an African theme. I'm going to use, this is the color that we're using on the hair of this miniature, so I kind of show you how this, all of a sudden everything that looked so dark doesn't look quite as dark. And it's all about context. So all of a sudden now, what seems so dark, not quite so dark, get rid of some of the edges. And using the chisel edge of our brush, and get some more darks over here, over the eye. So the flesh tone is dried out a little bit. So I'm going to put one more shot of the Parasite Brown back out on the palette. So I'm kind of making sure to go equal parts into the Ice Yellow and the Maiden Flesh. And this is among the some of the lightest colors that'll be used. One step a little bit lighter. And again, that's about as light as you would go. It's kind of that tanned ruddy flesh. Now for things like the eye, just for show, I'm going to throw a little bit of, this is a bluish, it's called Violet Shadow. It's also from Reaper. And this is kind of the difference between, say, other flesh tones that are just naturally a color versus one that's been sort of affected by the environment. So here I'm going to make the iris more of a blue. Not too blue, but definitely bluer. Reinforce some of the dark colors. Going to put some light into the iris. Obviously, on your miniature you won't do this because it's just too darn small. You have a highlight there. Just a few more highlights on the nose. Can make these be a little bit rosier by going into the brown rose, mixing it with the Maiden Flesh. Because the lips wouldn't necessarily be tan. Because that's the different approach here. You have to think of the skin color as being altered from what it originally might have been by the sun, by the environment. So hopefully this can be a nice reference guide moving ahead as we work on the miniature. So we'll consult this every so often as we paint and it will be a useful guide. And now that we have our little color exercise over here, we're going to start to put some paint on the miniature, keeping in mind some of the colors that were done there. Now let's just block in colors so we get this primer covered as quickly as possible. This is gray primer. Actually, I mixed white and black Vallejo brush-on primer to do this. I like to go with a neutral gray primer most of the time because white, as you can tell by the palette, is very stark. And you saw when we did that little sketch exercise that, now say this, that looks so dark on the palette, this olive drab, this is our hair color. Once we start to put this next to that neutral gray, it doesn't look quite as dark. So you can see what kind of an effect your primer can have. Now I sometimes I'll prime white. I usually don't prime pure black. So I'm going to use olive drab on the staff here, through the hair. My main goal here is to just figure out, alright, what colors are going to go where, what's going to be darker, what's going to be lighter. It's more of an art term, blocking in the colors. You know, most people's approach is to kind of focus in on one area. Let's just say the face. And they paint the face, and then they move on to the next area. The whole shaded base coat thing it liberates you from just working on one part at a time. It's let's work on the whole miniature all at once. And that also prevents certain disasters from happening, and that's where, say you do all that work on the face and then you go to do something, maybe hair around it, or if it's they have some kind of a hood or scarf over their head, and next thing you know you have a little accident and you just messed up all the face that you spent so much time painting. It's also about setting a context. So here I've started to go into the leather brown just as kind of a base for the flesh tones. We're obviously going to work all of these other colors in like this. One of the advantages too of the shaded base coat is that you can work a little bit wet into wet. You can see I'm kind of mixing the colors together fairly aggressively on the palette. That's because, again, I want to work quickly, I want to work rapidly. So I'm already starting to feel, okay, just how light should this flesh tone be in some places. I can let that dry for a little bit and start to go into some of the areas of purple on the clothes. I'm not going to care that, okay, this gets on some of the colors I just put down. It's not that big a deal. That's again kind of the whole point of the shaded base coat. You can put down colors, not have to worry about hitting some area that's all nice and finished. All I'm trying to do here is get some colors out on the miniature, basically set the stage. So we have a fair portion of this covered. And there's going to be some areas that are a little bit of a different coat, a little lighter. So I'm going into the green sky. And I'll go after these, looked almost like some kind of parchment type scrolls. On the staff, one of the reasons I'm using the green sky is to provide a little bit of a contrast. We're going to have all this warm flesh tone here, so I want to have more of a cool offset. So that's something that's complementary instead of something that'll just simply blend in. You can let yours dry a little more between coats if you feel the need. For me, I like the more painterly approach. So you can see I've actually gone into the hair. One reason why I like to have, especially on the darker hair like this, to go with highlights that are a little bit cooler is because the sunlight, it's coming down like this, and that's going to be a little bit more bluish. So that's why I'm kind of focusing some of the greens on the top of the hair. And we will darken this later. So one of the other aspects of the shaded base coat is to work a little bit lighter than what it's ultimately going to be. Gonna get into some of these lighter purples and start to think about certain parts of the costume, especially parts of the costume that are really going to complement the skin tone. Just like I did with the hair, I'm sort of allowing things to mix. Allowing things to mix on the miniature. Now if you want to keep your paint not only wetter on the palette longer, but on the miniature itself, you can use something like this. This is called Glaze Medium. This is made by Vallejo. And when you mix this in with your paint, you're going to get a longer palette life to your paint. But it's also going to stay wetter on the miniature longer. And that will give you opportunities to do wet blending, especially on a bigger miniature. This one is pretty small, so we don't have to necessarily worry about the paint drying too quickly. One of the reasons I've mounted the figure on this empty paint jar is so that I can move it around, constantly shifting from one spot of the miniature to another. Don't want to get too bogged down too quickly in just one spot. And constantly rotating this thing around really helps. Now there's sleeves. I want those to be more towards the purple. And what you start to see is gradually the colors emerge. So I can go into a much richer flesh tone, much lighter flesh tone mix. And I'm going to go into the face. Hands. This kind of technique, you have to be somewhat patient. You can't panic because you have to, it's all about planning ahead. It's all about what's going to happen next. It's not about what does it look like right now. It's more what are we building towards? And I'm gonna keep getting that brush into the parasite brown just to make sure that the mixture stays warm, doesn't get too cool, and that would be pasty and chalky. As if I went into this maiden flesh too soon, it's gonna get chalky. It's another reason I've got the yellow also out on the palette. So I'm at a point where I'm going to leave the flesh tone alone. And I'm going to go back into some of the green and brown. And work on staff. Put a few lights on the hair. Because again, this is all going to be shaded darker with a technique we're going to call glazing. And we'll cover that once we have the shaded base coat finished. And this is all about blocking in colors, but also doing some initial shading. We're figuring, okay, this is going to be light, top of that's going to be light, front part of the leg's going to be light. It's all about setting a context. And what I'll do is I'm going to take a hair dry to this, blow this off, put some new colors out on the palette, and we'll continue with our shaded base coat. I've dried off the miniature, and I've put some more fresh paint out on the palette, which means it's time to continue to work towards our lighter colors. And this is a little more of the flesh tone here, making sure some of that leather brown is in the mix so that it doesn't get too bright too quickly. And I'm going into the face, cheekbones, top of the lip, the chin, front part of the chest here, into the arms and hands, shoulder here, but still not wrapped up in any kind of details yet. I'm still trying to set the scene. So I've got this arm now, shoulder, underneath the shoulder, down towards the leg. So you saw that pattern. I started here, worked my way down, around. That's a good way to approach this kind of global painting of the miniature, thinking about all the areas at once. The other idea behind the shaded base coat is to not be bogged down by formulas and color mixes. Is it 10% this and 20% that? When you're working this way by comparing and contrasting colors to each other, there's less to remember. Because even if some parts of this are, say, too light, well, we can shade those darker when it comes time for glazing. See, the face starts to emerge now that we're getting more and more light, but making sure that, again, does not get too light too quickly. And I continue to follow that path, that chain from the face to the arm, down to the leg, instead of just... This is another reason why we don't just do the face, because it's easier to keep the rest of the flesh tone in line color-wise if we're working on all the areas all at once. Back to the shoulder, back at the hand. Down the leg again. I want some of the ice yellow back out on the palette. So now I'm going to put some touches of that. Even a little bit of the green. And start here up at the top. And work your way down. Thinking, all right, the top of the shoulder here, that needs to catch some light, because again, the light's coming down on that. The leg here, same thing, up on the top part of the thigh, less so here. The knee catches a little light. Over here, this part catching light, top of the thigh catches light. Over towards the hand. Start at the top, progress down. Work on some of the fingers here, make sure that you can see. To the fingers. And at a certain point about here, I'm not going to do too much more adding light to the skin because I want to get some colors in other areas also. So I continue to rotate this thing around. So I see, okay, the fingers here, those need some light. Reason I have to now not do too much more with the flesh tone is I need to get into the stuff that's around it. Let's try some of the purple, because that needs to be lightened a little bit to see just what we've got with our flesh tones. So right away, just seeing that already changes how I think, okay, how light or dark do I need my flesh tone to be? Do I need more shadows in some areas? Do I need more lights in others? Do is change the angle of the miniature here, so I can get some color in here, and use a little bit of the rose to make that less transparent, because that purple is kind of a transparent purple. Just like I did with the skin, making sure that I'm constantly moving around the miniature. And not worrying too much about details, because remember, we have all that glazing still yet to come. And what we're doing here, just like I've said before, is setting the stage for all of that glazing, shading, tinting. Some parts of this will be even made lighter, and actually go into some of the yellow. That's going to be some of the brightest of the purple color. I'm going to leave this somewhat darker so that the flesh tone doesn't appear too light. If I make this light, then the flesh tone won't quite look the way I want it to. And at a certain point here, I'm not going to do the purple anymore. I'm going to actually go into some of the green. Because I want to do some of this down here. And got pouches, these what I saw as being pieces of parchment kind of flowing off. Gonna go back to some of the hair. Where that crosses in front of the shoulder. Want to get some more light on the staff. All the while thinking I'm going to work darker colors over the top of this. Got some other items here. We've got these daggers here. Gonna throw some quick lights there. Got some shoes, sandal here, dagger over here. So even though we've only been working on this for a matter of minutes, we've already got a nice, healthy arrangement of colors. But you can see in the one on the left, much lighter than our finished piece on the right. And that's what a shaded base coat should look like. It should be lighter than it's eventually going to end up, because we wanted to make enough room for us on the value scale to do that glazing. And I've got a glossary that explains some of these terms like value scale. Although it's really not a super complicated concept. Go back to our sketch, obviously. Here's your darks, here's your lightest lights, and a lot of this is your mid-tone. This is all that kind of that drama in the middle. So I'm not going to take this a whole lot further. You can see I kept working with the bigger brush the whole time. So it's just about time. Kind of let this dry off completely. So we can get into some of our glazing. This is the next phase of the miniature painting, and that's glazing. Now that's a broad term that I use to cover all the stuff we're going to do. So we're actually going to do some shading. We're going to make this darker to make her look more like her. And I've got some colors out here on the palette. Got a few GW washes, Agrax Earth Shade, Reikland Flesh Shade. I've got some Amethyst, this is from Secret Weapon, a couple of Vallejo glazes, a sepia shade, a black shade, and finally this color right here, this is from Reaper, this brown liner. It's a really deep, rich dark. This is a little bit more viscous, like regular paint. but not quite as thick, and it's certainly nowhere near as thin as some of these washes. And we're going to use this for some of our deepest darks. So I'm going to put these out on the palette, and then we're going to do some glazing. I have my glaze colors out on the palette, and I've got a liner brush, which is one of the key ways that I like to apply my glazes. And what makes it a glaze versus a wash is that a glaze is very, very controlled, very targeted. That's why I have this small brush. Instead of using a very large, almost like those number 8 rounds, you can also mix glaze colors together. That's why I'm drawing out some of my colors. And to start things off, I'm actually going to work on the clothes. So I'm going to gather up some purple. And I'm just going to work that color, make it darker. If I need to, see, I can do this. I can take it away with my finger. I can dab it away with the brush. The whole idea is to keep the lights, but get shadow. I'm going to mix a little tiny bit of the black with that to make sure it doesn't get too, I want it to be too glowy. So there we go. So again, it's all about control. And letting gravity work for me, starting at the top, working down. I'm going to take some Agrax Earthshade here, fill in this part of the chest, get some shadow there. So go back to the purple, do this part of the cloth. But leaving this alone for right now, because I want this to, I want what I'm putting on the cloth to kind of settle down, to dry. So I'm going to go over here on the back of the leg, this part of the cloth. Switch over. And if need be, even water that mixture down so that I don't lose my lights. This is all about keeping the lights, but also getting in that shadow color. So I haven't done much here. It's all focused in these recesses. May have to change the position of the miniature. That's again why I like to have it on the paint jar. I can see I've again preserved the lights and really let my glaze color do some of the work as far as the shadows. And you can do some tinting as well. If I wanted parts of this to be more reddish, you can do more of the amethyst. If I want it to be a little more grayed down, I mix a little more of the black with it. We've got the little sleeves here. Same idea. Be very controlled. Keep the lights, but make sure you get enough shadow. make these recesses kind of fall back visually. And when necessary, you can pull away some of the color. I'm going to go into the black while we're down here. And some of the earth shade. And do that ponytail. So I'll shift to the other side. Start at the top here. And water this down. Work my way down the ponytail and into these, could be ribbons. I kind of saw them as pieces of parchment, that's why I had done little runes. So I'm going to carry it over to the front side. You can see nowhere near as intense as what I did down here in that shadow area. I have some of these items here. I'm going to go with some of the brown liner to really darken down the sepia shade. And pull away so that I don't lose my lightest lights. It's all about establishing the shadow area. Same thing in front of that. Gonna water down this mix and work on these leggings here. So you can see I sort of changed the color as I went down. It started out with the brown liner and the agrax, and then more towards the sepia as I got down towards the toes. Here I'm actually going to mix a little bit of the purple in, and work it down to the sepia. Here I'm going to actually use more of the Reichland Earth shade. This goes off camera, I apologize. Now I'm going to put a little bit of the brown liner mixed with the agrax, and we want these straps across in front of the legs. Being careful, see I'm letting some of the wash get down in there. I don't want this spill over. I'm going to do this one as well. That's what we've done. We've by default gotten some of the shadow around that strap. Take some of the brown liner and really water that down and do kind of like an armor plate here. Just a little bit there, but didn't mess with this, didn't mess with this. It was all focused right there. Tiny touch of the agrax here around the neck. Go more to the black. I'm going to do some work on the hair. So I'm going to choose this side. Start at the top. Work my way down. Let some of the earth shade get in there. See, I just picked this one section. I wasn't doing all the hair all at once. I just picked this one section so that I could let gravity do a lot of the work. Start at the top, pull it down. Gonna go flip this over to the opposite side. Do the same thing. Start at the top and pull that down. Not here, but just in this one section. You can see already the hair starting to look much more like this here, nowhere near as light. And if you're wondering why I do all this, it's that notion of being able to just tint a color to what you would like it to be. See here, I put in more of the black, some of the brown liner. It just takes on a whole different color tone. Plus, it's easier to not have to remember that whole, well, how did you get that here? What color did you use? Well, all we did was we took some of the green sky and some of the olive drab and just kind of mixed those together till it was more green sky than olive drab. But all the rest of it is being done with these glazes. We're tinting at different colors, and that's just one of the advantages. Because also, pink colors get discontinued, or it runs out and you just can't find it anywhere. This way, if you can just tint your colors to be what they need to be, then you're not as locked into one particular color. So yeah, I'll leave the hair alone. Not gonna work on these little decorations in the hair just yet. I'm gonna move over to the staff, and first thing I want to do is take some of the Reichland Flesh Shade, go over to the black, take away where need be. Some of the earth shade, back to the black again. Stopping where the hand is, working around that. Instead of going over it, going on either side of the hand. I'm going to use a little bit of sepia mixed with black. Carry this down the staff and pull away so that I don't completely lose the lights. And once it starts to get dry in some areas, that's where I can do some subsequent layers of glazes. See, these pouches were very, very light. They're probably almost this color here, but now with the different series of glazes we've tinted them, they're almost more reddish. So here I'm going to do another layer of glaze right there to darken that down, make that more of a shadow, more of a recess. But I also want to do a little bit of glazing on the flesh tones. This is going to be much more subtle. You can see I'm watering it down, going mostly in from the Agrax to the flesh shade. A little thing like that, And on the hand, use that to get a little bit of shading on the hand. So again, here, left everything else alone, just worked in that one area of dark. On the legs here. So again, down on this end, that's where I took kind of the watered down, so that watered down glaze. Get down the side of the leg there. Have a few spots to do on the face. Gonna work right here over the lips. We've got the eyes, into the nose. Gonna put some now on this hand up here on the top. Again, thinking about the recesses, leaving this alone. And at a certain point, you may want this to dry so that you can do more and more layers of glazing if you feel you need to. The thing I'm going to do is dry this off after I do a little bit of, right here with the sepia and these little decorations on the hair. And I'll let those dry, and just kind of in general, let some of this settle down dry, and then we're going to go back in. We're taking some of our standard paint colors and actually mix them in with these glazes to do more work in those middle tones that I've mentioned, and work our way towards those brightest highlights. Now that the glazes are dried, I put some of my regular colors back out on the palette, and this is kind of a fun thing that I'll show you. See, I'm taking those regular colors and I'm actually mixing them. So mixing these with my glaze colors. That sepia looks dramatically different. I actually mixed some here with the Agrax Earth Shade, so we have this kind of a grayish color. And by doing something like this, it gives me a color that I can use here on the staff. Or on the hair. It's a nice subtle color, or down here on these ribbons of parchment. I could mix this with the black if I wanted to. I can do a few little touches on the braid here, because the nice thing about mixing the paint in with your glazes is that it also thins down that paint. You can mix it with the black to be even more of a gray. can put some of that on this part of the staff. And that was all just the same color. That was just taking the maiden flesh and mixing it with all those different glaze colors. So that's a nice fun thing that you can do when you still have your glazing colors out on the palette. Now I want to make sure that the flesh tone areas are, they don't have any weird rough areas that are left over by some of the glazes. That can happen. That's why we go back into these middle tone areas. Here, working on inside part of the chest, not too much, just a little bit. To the hands, ends of these fingers, top of the shoulder. I can see I was almost able to get the same color we've been using before by mixing in the regular paint with the glaze. The reason I'm doing this now instead of earlier, because this color is very translucent and it's not going to cover very well, but we've got a good solid base of color underneath it that we can work from. So we've got these little decorations on the sleeve. So I can bring those out a little more. So doing some of these little touches on the staff. And all of this, like we said before, it's all about to set the offset the flesh tone, where we've got some of the warmer parts of the flesh tone. I'm putting more cool colors everywhere else, like on the parchment there, on the leggings here. Also making it a little bit lighter so that the flesh tone stands out. Can even do some work with the amethyst here. Especially up here. The face. I want a few highlights where the light is catching this, but again, I don't want it to get too warm because it'll make the flesh tone look too cold. And by warm, that means, by too warm, that means too red. And again, This is also about cleaning up the midtones, because sometimes when you're doing your glazes, you'll get a little bit of a watermark here and there, something that's not quite as smooth as you want it to be. What I want to do is shift gears a little bit and actually do some of the details on the face, some of the eyes, the lips, that sort of thing. I need some light color to work with here. Actually going to take some of the verdigris and I'm going to put in the whites of the eyes. Just wanted to get those in. Can take my brown liner and what I want to do now is your iris and some of the dark shading around it. So I like this brown liner because it's very dark, but still nice and thin. Putting in an eyebrow. And the upper lid there. Working on the upper lip. Now in this case, if I want to do just like how we did the blue eyes on the color test, I can throw a little bit of that dark blue out onto the palette. I'll hold this upside down because what I'll do is make sure that the iris touches this upper lid. You don't want it kind of floating, suspended in the middle. It's going to look very demonic otherwise. So thin down the paint. I'm going to put one there. Make sure that they line up together. This one and this one going to fall in the same part of the eye. Turn that back around. So now we've got some eyes that are kind of looking off this way in the direction of the staff. See that? I'm going to throw a few quick darks on the staff. You can see there's a section on the arm here that actually could use some flesh tone color. Gotten kind of wiped out with the glazing, so that's been restored. Down by the feet here, I want to do a little indication of the toes. Wanted to make that a little bit more shaded right there. So what I'm going to do at this point is kind of let some of this set. Then we're going to do some some final details. Now I'm going to put in some more finishing type touches. Got some of the ice yellow back out on the palette. And this is so I can do a few targeted highlights on the flesh tone. So make sure is that in some of the over the eye, over the upper lip, on the nose, I want to make sure that those are going to be light enough. Because sometimes with these little, when something is this small, sometimes you have to force the issue a little bit. In terms of lights and darks. The arm there, some of the fingers, see on the top where this hip is, it just needs to catch some more light. Top of that knee, rotate this around, it's going to be the same thing on the other leg, that just needs a little more. I'm going to do the top of the shoulder here just a bit, not too much. So just that little bit that starts to really make this recede. This comes forward. On this hand that's holding the staff, I'm going to designate these knuckles a little more. All the while trying to think in terms of more of a golden color to show that it's tanned. It's a tan. It's not just kind of a pale light highlight. If it's too pale, too rosy, you'll lose the effect of your suntan. But on the opposite side of that, if you get too bright with it, well then they might look there's that dreaded kind of pumpkin look to it, where it's way too bright, and you've made them orangey, and they look like they've had a tanning booth accident. I'm going to do a few more lights on the hair, because even though it's dark, I want it to catch some light. And right here up at the top to kind of show the light's coming down and hitting. That's why we've got some more of the verdigris. So I just designated a few of those as the light colors. Scarf that falls there. I'll work on that top edge to bring that out. I'm going to use a little bit of that blue to put some shadows right here. On the chest, I hear right here on the inside of this, a few lighter lights. on the cheekbones. I also want to they're just a tad bit lighter. Same thing there. Go into that yellow just a tiny bit for one last spot there on the nose. And on the chin. Down on by the feet here. I still think I want some lighter colors on the toes. Just a little bit. I'm going to leave the other one alone. Now on these other items here on the costume, you can do as much or as little as you want. Obviously, if this is going to be a competition figure of some kind where you're going to spend hours on this, you can see on mine, you can see some of the freehand there on these little ribbony pieces of parchment. I added a few little red accents on this, and we can do that. We can find ourselves some type of a red to throw out. I'm gonna maybe just take this. That's a flat red, and just like I did with the other colors, mixing it with some of the sepia. And I can use this. A few little color accents here. Same thing on this side. Up there. It just doesn't take very much. And while I have that, see, this makes a very nice rosy color. I'm going to actually throw some of that on the lips here. Because, just like here, I didn't want to lose the kind of the rosy nature of the lip just because they're tanned. So right there, I like that little touch. That was and I'm going to throw a little bit of a highlight on top of that though. I would like to have the underside underneath that eye probably a little bit lighter, and I let some of the red get in there to make that mixture a little more rosy. And what I've done is, if I'm going to introduce something like this red, can't just have it here and here. It's got to be spread around. That's one of the reasons why I put some of it here on the lips, just to generate a little bit underneath the eye. Because once you introduce this, you have to spread it around everywhere. It can't just be in one spot. So that's how you can alter your plan too. You don't have to follow the plan right down to the letter. You can sometimes make adjustments to it. When you make adjustments to one part, you have to make adjustments to the whole. So I hope this was fun for you to watch. I hope there's plenty of information that you were able to get from this. And I hope when you try your tanned flesh, that be it if it's a pirate or some Amazons or some kind of forest dwellers, maybe wood elves that have been out in the sun, that you're able to have lots of success. Here's one last little segment to cover a few of the small details, just in case people were curious. You can see on the sample miniature, get some of this freehand here, some oranges. So after I dried things off, so I put some of the freehand in here, added some oranges. Basically it was another liner brush, and working with that brown liner, because you can see how thin this gets. There's an example of the liner brush. You can see that it just keeps going and going. Don't have to put more paint in it. That's what I love about the liner brush. The spotted brush just doesn't quite let you do that. Now what's nice about the brown liner is that when you do freehand bits like this, it kind of looks like ink on parchment, because see, it is, even though it's dark, it's still a little bit translucent. So that's a little touch that I added there. I strengthened a few of my lights on some of the costume. See here on some of the leggings. Just added a few little lights here and there, just to make things a little more interesting. And again, kind of this whole idea of the light coming down this way, so that's why I only did it there. Maybe I'll do a tiny bit right there. Maybe catch a few other highlights like there. Again, nothing that's going to interfere with your flesh tone. So now you've got your lady shaman all ready to go. Maybe throw out some spells.
Here in my mind where it can all be seen. Hey!